I wonder if you can recognise where I am today. Going to continue reading from Treason. We are on the next chapter, which is called The King's Visitors. I woke up early with the sound of birdsong rippling into my room, and I went straight into the little chapel. Brother John was already there, lighting the candles with a long taper. My father joined us, and he and I kneeled together by the carving of Matthew. We attended Mass and gently sang the responses to Brother John's verses. I loved Mass as much as Father did, I think. It was part of my life. Sunlight poured through the yellow and green linens over the window slits, and the smoke of the incense and the candles clouded into it and turned amber. As we prayed, I dimly heard a distant clattering sound of hooves in the lane. But my hearing must have been better than Brother John's or Father's, or else they were not disturbed by it. They kept their heads bowed, their whispered prayers shushing calmly over urgent sounds that were coming nearer, sounds that eventually alarmed me so much that my face was beading with sweat. "Father!" I whispered, but they both ignored me. Surely I wasn't imagining the sounds now. Raised voices, marching feet, nearer, coming nearer. Still Brother John's soft voice hummed on. Anus Deo qui tollis peccata mundi, misery nobis. Lamb of God, you who takest away the sins of the world, have mercy upon us. Suddenly the door to the chapel was flung open. My father's steward, Bailey, heaving gulps of air into his chest, stood like a wounded bear in the doorway, eyes bulging, arms flailing, swaying backwards and forwards on the balls of his feet. "Soldiers have come!" he gasped. My father nodded. He showed no fear or surprise, except in a clenching of the muscle at the side of his jaw. He stood up, grasped my arm and hauled me down the corridor. Brother John followed, clasping the precious gold chalice in both of his hands. My father rushed us into a room at the far end of the corridor, opened the door of a passage concealed in the painted panel, and tried to push Brother John inside. The priest stood back, staring from one to the other of us. Go on, Father urged. "You too, Will. Get in." He shoved me through, and Brother John tumbled in after me. The door was swung to. I heard my father and Bailey panting as they lifted a heavy table and pushed it against the door. We were in total darkness. It was stifling hot and smelled of damp and the sweat of fear. I could hear Brother John's breathing rattling in his throat with fright. Blind and terrified, I groped my way on all fours the whole length of the passage, which seemed now to be over the kitchens. I could smell our breakfast fish cooking. I could hear the clattering of pots, men's raised voices, but I couldn't make out the words. Brother John didn't follow me. I could hear him whispering and knew he was praying. We seemed to be there for hours. Perhaps we were. I had cramp in my legs and my head was throbbing violently, and I felt sick and faint with the heat. I was straining for sounds, any sounds. Where were the soldiers now? Had they gone? I had no idea. And at last, when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, and I was screaming inside my head for something, anything to happen, there came the muffled scraping of heavy furniture being dragged, and the cupboard door was pulled open. Blinding daylight scorched my eyes, and then a dark shape blocked the opening. The shape crouched into the cupboard, grabbed Brother John and hauled him out. Then the door was slammed shut, and I was in darkness again. I still didn't move. I still had no idea what was happening out there. I stretched myself out on the floor to ease my cramped legs and must have fallen asleep. At last the door was open again. I sat up, screwing my eyes against the soft light of a candle, and heard my father calling my name. I called out, and he put his arms out to help me to stand up. "Have they gone?" I asked. I was sobbing with relief at being outside that tomb. "Yes, they've gone." My father's voice was breaking to pieces. "They've taken Brother John. They have spared us. They told me their orders from the king were to take the priest as a lesson to us. He will hang, William, he will hang." The first time I saw hanging, I must have been about 10 years old. It's like a party, full of shouting and jeering, caps being tossed into the air, mugs of ale being passed around. If the crowd hates the victim, even if all he's done is to cut a purse from a rich man's belt, they howl at him. If they like him, even if he's a murderer, they howl at the hangman. I remember watching the hangman, wondering what his face was like under that black hood, wondering if he had ever had to hang someone he knew. I used to dream about him at night, coming for me out of the darkness, the slits of his eyes glinting through his mask. I remember once an old woman next to me whooping and cackling as the man to be hanged was dragged to the scaffold. "Oh, what a villain!" she chortled. "His sweet face full of wickedness." And that villain was a priest. I remember, like Brother John. He prayed his Latin prayers in front of the scaffold. The crowd went absolutely silent, listening for what would be said. "Do you accept that King Henry is the head of the church in England?" an official asked him. "I do not," the priest said in a clear and calm voice. "Do you reject the teaching of the Pope in Rome?" "I do not." And that set the crowd roaring and jeering again, and I couldn't take my eyes off him, that little priest with a gentle, forgiving face, and yet every bit of my body was jingling with nerves and excitement and fear and thrill and horror and all those things as the board under his feet was pulled away and he twitched and bobbed and hanged and dangled like a puppet on a string. And then he was still, so still, and would be still forever. My father was right, and I knew it. Brother John would hang. But we'd been spared. Why? And for how long?